I think the destruction of the environment is the most important issue facing us all, and as a Christian, I believe we have an individual duty to protect the life of this world. What baffles me is that many Christians doubt the importance of protecting what we have been given. I know that at some point I will have to explain to my children why their world is degraded and what I did or didn't do about it.
The problem's sin, basically. It's greed. People wanting what they want and wanting it now, wanting it for themselves, not thinking of future generations.
Therefore, I'm making a film that presents in Christian terms why we need to save the environment. If Try is the man to unite people around this issue, then who is he?
It seemed like everybody was an environmentalist in the 60s. We all had concerns. And that's where really we started hearing this thought, well, it's all going to burn anyway.
So we need to bring together Christianity and the idea of environmental stewardship.
Jeremiah had prophesied, if you don't care for the land, you're going to be taken into bondage. The first to suffer are the poor. If anybody's responsible for the poor, it's the followers of Christ.
I always thought Christianity was a verb, it had to show action as its state of being.
There's been something in my heart, and that is to see the church move out in issues of compassion, justice, and mercy. So the question remains, can we learn? Will we learn? Or will we learn too late?
And guys, you just seen the great trailer for Cowboy and Preacher right here on the Andrew Burnett Show. And I'm here with my great friend, Pastor Try Robinson. Try, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Andrew. Thanks.
It's great to have you on. So give us a little bit of background of how Cowboy and Preacher came along and where the inspiration for the documentary came from.
Well, Will Fraser was a filmmaker in London and had done a numbers of films and documentary films, but he had this huge concern and question why American evangelicals seem to be so anti-environment and creation care. And I had written a book in about 2008 called Saving God's Green Earth, which told my journey, the story of my journey as an evangelical pastor, had come into that conviction that all Christians should care about creation and in caring for this and being stewards of the earth. And so he had read the book, and I was doing a conference in Oxford. My wife and I can't remember, but it was somewhere quite a long time ago. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And he took a bus all the way from downtown London, Cathedral in London, and yet personally would say that he didn't really have an authentic relationship with Christ at the time, because he just was frustrated with the church and it was keeping him kind of at bay. But yet he was still working in the church. It was funny, but he came all the way out there. At a break in the conference, we met with him for just a short time, and he said he wanted to bring a crew and come to our ranch in Idaho and make a documentary film that I might answer the question why American evangelicals seem to be so contrary to creation care. And so that's how it started, really.
So how can we be more contrary to creation care? Tell us a little bit about what we can do.
Well, first of all, I think that just speaking as an authentic Christian, I think everyone should see what God has to say about it. That this earth is a special place and it's divine, and it's been put here that, for all of us to survive, and not just survive, but to enjoy. And I just think to really just come into the biblical understanding of our responsibility is the first thing. That's what happened to me anyway. I always have cared about the world and the environment. Been raised in the mountains, hiking and horse packing, and just loving the wilderness, and I raised my kids that way, and they did as well. And so my wife and I had lived in the country right when we first got married, and we said we weren't living off the land, we were trying to live with the land, and not just not just take total advantage of it, but to try to give back and participate with what God was doing.
So there's 7 Bible studies that are revealed in this documentary, Cowboy and Preacher. Give us a little insight of what you're trying to teach here in this documentary.
Well, even as Will came over and kind of lived with us and watched our life and watched what we were doing here, as I'm trying to model creation care through our sustainable farmstead here in Idaho. So he would continue to ask me questions. He lived here like almost a month, I think, and I took him in the backcountry on horseback. I mean, we had a lot of time for conversations, and it all kind of turned back to the Bible. Well, how can you say this, and how can you prove that? And so it kind of turned into these 7 Bible studies, and we captured those in the film. They're very short, just a few minutes long each, and he thought, well, then let's base the whole film around these 7 Bible studies that really, maybe 7 key points as to why Christians should care.
So what is your hopes that the viewers that watch Cowboy and Preacher, the message that they convey through watching the documentary, what is your hopes on that?
Well, I think my hopes are what Will's hopes were, that people could look at my wife Nancy and myself, our lifestyle and our passion and sense of purpose for this, and see us not as these extreme environmentalists, but just normal American Christian people. We're ranchers, we work the land, we have to take care of it, and not only that, I'm an evangelical pastor, have been for years, actually pastoring a very large evangelical church in a Maine capital city of a very red state, getting a lot of pushback for our convictions. And so, it was just to see what a Bible-believing Christian does and in response to this commission to care and steward creation.
And, you were talking about ranching, and, in ranching, you have to take care of animals and things like that. But to a pastor that's in an evangelical church, it's almost the same way, as they have to shepherd their flock. So what is your hopes for a pastor that may be watching this film, that they can help their congregation to learn more about creation care?
Well, that's a good one, actually, Andrew. There's a lot of parallels, between ranching and, biblical. We actually have a big vineyard here. We actually make wine, and there's so many analogies in the Bible about vineyards and wine, and I mean, as you know, but also we raise sheep. Of course, there's a lot in the Bible about that, being a shepherd, and so there are a lot of parallels throughout this. But I think one thing I would hope for evangelical pastors, as you've said, to see is that here is a pastor that took a risk. And I believe that there's many, many, many pastors that have the same conviction, but they're afraid to really say anything. They're like a in the closet environmentalist. They care about creation. They love the outdoors. They love it. They see it. They see the damage that's being done in the earth right now through rapidly changing climate and all these other things. But because of politics, they're afraid to say much from their pulpits. And so here's a story of one guy who did that. And I think they're afraid they'd lose their people, And here I am in a very red state, in a capital city, a lot of politicians even in my church. And yet I preached these 3 messages many years ago now. It was about 2005 or maybe even a little earlier than that. And so it was riskier then than maybe it is now even. And I got standing ovations. And not only that, but one of the things that any evangelical pastor should care about is evangelism. And that we actually saw our church go through a major spurt of growth, because people started coming to church who said, I've been waiting for some pastor to talk about this and say something about this, have the courage to do it, and not cower down to just the political pressures. And so I hope that they would get the courage to do what I did, you know.
So looking back in the past, did you ever think that there would be a documentary formed on your life, or was this something that was just a kind of a consequence that you never knew about?
Yeah, I think, in fact, to be honest with you, my wife, even more than myself, really resisted Will coming doing the documentary. I mean, we live a very private life, you know, a life of solitude, really, up here on this mountain, and really didn't want to exploit our life. And, you know, so we were actually afraid to do this, you know, for a while. In fact, it took 5 years before we actually agreed with Will to let him do it. So, yeah, it's amazing the movie ever got made.
That's amazing. So was environmentalism something that you knew that you always wanted to do, even from a child, or was it something that struck you throughout life that you knew that you wanted to do it?
Well, I've always loved and cared for the earth. You know, I mean, as a kid, my dad took me hunting and fishing and backpacking. We horse packed into the wilderness areas. Um, Later, I was a pilot and flew into the wilderness areas. I've always had this love, and when I married Nancy in 1970, we immediately moved on to a farm, like a homestead that had been in my family for 4 generations. Nobody had lived there for many years. It was kind of a weekend place for my dad and I, had kind of a hunting cabin, and it was really remote. No running. Well, we had spring-fed water, but no electricity, and it was off the grid completely, up in the mountains, an hour from any populated area, town. And we raised our kids there for 20 years, and then eventually came to Idaho to plant a church. And we had to live in Boise at the time because I was 24/7 at first. I didn't have a multiple staff and had no way of, you know, I had to be at the hospital in the middle of the night and everything, and I just couldn't. So soon as I did, though, as the church grew and allowed us a little more freedom, we started moving out again until here we are on our farmstead here, about an hour out of Boise.
So through pastoring the church, what would a day in the life of an environmentalist pastor look like?
I don't think it would look any different. It's just a matter of teaching you know, the whole Bible in a sense, and I think it also means not getting too implanted politically, to where you become afraid to actually speak pieces of the Bible that are important to say, things that are important to people, you know. And I think it's, you know, even in the day that we're in, people are actually afraid to talk about character and integrity and things like that right now. And it's like, come on, man, we are Christians, you know, we need to teach the whole counsel of God all the way through.
And you know, it's one thing that I was thinking about while you was talking about this. You know, kids today don't understand the love of outdoors. We see that they're turning obviously to technology and things like that instead of going to Boy Scouts where there's camping and things like that, to where they can love more environments. What can we do to help this generation get more involved in environmentalism?
Boy, that's a huge point, Andrew, because as things have kind of progressed, we don't have the Leave It to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet. Well, I'm speaking of my own generation, you know, households anymore. I mean, we have one parent families. We have these broken homes. We have kids being raised without parents that have either the desire or the time to get them out into the hills and the mountains. You know, when I say, you know, if you don't see it, you don't appreciate it. If you don't appreciate it, you're not going to really want to do anything about it. And so the key is to get young people, especially the next generation, out to where it gets into their, not just into their mind, but into their heart, you know, how precious this gift of the earth is. One of the things when I after I preached that first message, because I always believed in kinetic teaching, that means action. I always thought discipleship is a verb, it has to show action as its state of being. I said to my congregation, hey, we've got to get this church family out into the mountains. And so I went to the Forest Service and said, because my family had been trail builders for a number of years. I was a school teacher before I was in the ministry. So I had the summers off, and we'd go back, pack horses back into the wilderness in the Sierra Nevadas and build pieces of the Pacific Crest Trail. And so I knew about trail building. I went to our Forest Service here and said, I'm going to bring people from my church up into the mountains and reconstruct trails and do trail maintenance, just for the sole purpose of getting them out into the mountains. And I realized there were so many broken homes. And so I actually had adopted kids out to other parents so that they would take them out camping and fishing and, into the backpacking. And actually, here we live in this beautiful state, the state of Idaho, with the largest wilderness area in the whole continental United States. And how many people in my church I realized had never even experienced it or seen it. So the key was to get them out there, and you're right. The culture's changed, it's shifted, and it's, kids are occupying themselves with their, working their cell phones and not seeing beyond a video screen, and I think that's part of the problem.
And it seems like they become addicted to it more or less than anything, because, if we could get them outside to enjoy nature, I've always said if we could get them on a hike or something, they'd want to go more. But, once they play that video game, they're going to go back to that video game because they know that they can get their joy there. You can find joy outdoors. What are some ways for you as an environmentalist? How do you find your joy outdoors?
Well, for one thing, I see a real movement towards organic living, so I find that people are loving now to have vegetable gardens and raise even chickens in their backyard, and just start getting more their hands and feet into the soil. And when that happens, it becomes contagious.
Try, it's been a blessing having you on the program today. Thank you so much for coming on. I encourage our viewers to watch Cowboy and Preacher. Tell us a little bit about where it's going to be distributed and where they can find it at.
Andrew, I think maybe you might know that better than I would. I don't really have that information on me right now, but I think you can just Google Cowboy Preacher or Will Frazier, and all that information will come up for you. Will Frazier's director.
Well, thank you so much, Pastor Try. You're welcome back on the program anytime. God bless you, and we look forward to having you on again sometime.
Hey, thank you, Andrew. Anytime. I'd love it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.